So the other shoe finally dropped. This is the topic we're going to talk about today, the visit of the Speaker of US Congress, Nancy Pelosi, to Taiwan. Welcome to our show. I'm your host, Kathy Zhang. So despite the warnings from the Chinese Communist Party, Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi arrived in Taiwan for an official visit at the night of August 2nd, local time. So what does it reflect? The state of the Taiwan-US relations and the US-China relations, and what significant changes has occurred. So I will share with you the most recent speech by Professor Miles Yu, who is the former Secretary of State, Chief and China Policy Advisor at the U.S. Department for former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. And you may got some insights. So there has been many speculations and discussions on whether Pelosi will pay an official visit to Taiwan during her Asian tour. Based on Miles Yu, his speech, it seems it's bound to happen, and you may wonder why. So please continue with my show. So Miles Yu gave a speech at the Taiwanese American Center in Northern California on the topic of the development and prospects of Taiwan-US-China interactions. As you remember, Professor Yu visited Taiwan with former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in March of this year. And in his speech, Professor Yu explained the most fundamental changes in the US-China relations since the Trump administration and the reasons behind them. And then he analyzed the impact and the significance of Taiwan on the US-China landscape as well as on the world landscape. To start off, he said in the speech that in the past 5 to 6 years, there has been important changes of relationship between the US and China. The changes are not only just some specific policies, but most importantly, there have been some profound changes in the fundamental interactions and the principles in regards to China. He feels very fortunate to be able to play a role in promoting such changes and make that happen. Up to now, he said that such changes have basically become relatively permanent, no matter which party it is in power in Washington, D.C., whether it's GOP or Democrats. He said the only difference between the parties is in the degree of implementation of those changes. However, he said in terms of the basic philosophies, the general directions, and the general principles, there's basically some bipartisan consensus. Because the basic understanding of the Chinese Communist Party has changed fundamentally in all parties. And he said Taiwan certainly plays a very important role there. In the speech, he explained that in the past 5 to 6 years, what are the fundamental changes in the US-China relations? In what areas there are still some things unchanged in this relationship? And then he talked about Taiwan's impact on the US, China, and the world, and what its significance and impact. So let's go right into his speech. First of all, he just raised this question, what's the most fundamental changes in the US-China relationship in the past 5 to 6 years?
在过去50年以来，这个中美关系发生了些什么最根本变化？第一点就是说，美国政府基本上放弃了国际战略上一个重要的一个这个战略重心，就是我们打了几十年冷战，一直把俄国、把苏联、把欧洲放在重点上，就是作为是美国的战略重点。那么，这个川普政府里面最重要的一个改变就是把这个改变了，就是把中共作为这个美国 国际安全的头号挑战。
All right. So, how did the Trump administration consider such kind of challenge? Professor Mao Zedong explained that there are three aspects they considered.
那么这个挑战呢，就是我们这个是根据以下3个方面来考虑的。第一个，这个战略意向；第二个就是它的这个能力，就是说第3个就是机会。这个英文来讲就是 intent, capabilities, and opportunities 啊。从这个3个方面来讲，就是中共呢，它的意图呢当然是很明确的，它不仅仅是要这个要把台湾拿下来，它跟周边国家什么这个日本、越南、印度、菲律宾、韩国，几乎所有的它的边界的国家，在过去几十年来，它都有争论啊。所以它这个呢是一个有一个比较大的一个野心的。那么现在中共它经济上发达了，军事上也发达了，财大气粗，所以它对全球也有一种非常这个毫无掩饰的野心。比如他想这个通过他的国家支持的一些大企业来垄断世界上的这个最核心的通讯网络啊，通过华为啊、5G 啊这些在做。另外一个呢，他对全球的一些必要的重要的战略资源，他是完全想控制所以说呢，这样子的话，我们就觉得这个中共的战略意图呢，它是实际上是想取代美国的这个全球霸主地位。这个美国呢也不是一个霸主，就是美国呢，它领导了一个自由开放的一个世界体系。这个体系呢，中共他觉得对它是一个威胁。这个跟美国共和党、民主党、自由派、保守派在美国华盛顿当权没有什么根本的关系。因为什么呢？美国这个政治制度存在的本身就是对中共一个最大的威胁。他们觉得这个最害怕的就是什么呢？最害怕的就是怕中国的老百姓、中国的人民来认同美国的这套政治制度和价值观，这是他们最害怕的。所以说呢，就是说美国这种存在对他们就是一种最大的威胁。这个是我们有一个就是在过去几年以来有一个非常清醒的认识，在我几十年以前就认识到这个了。但是要把它转变成美国的一个国策，转变成美国的一个2党有共识的一种政策基础，这个需要很多时间的。那么很幸运的是，我们这个在过去5年里面有这个像蓬佩奥这样的有决断能力的人，还有像这个川普总统，川普总统有很多很好的这个感觉我们在国务院里面就把它系统的整理出来然后这个作为一个美国的外交政策，这是第一点。
All right. So, how specifically they implement such change? Mao Zedong referred to something that actually just gave me an answer for a question I have been asking myself for many years. Remember, in almost every presidential debate, all the candidates will just talk about China, how bad is China under the Communist Party, and how they will deal with it. And then after the election is done, and each and every president just went off as usual, business as usual, dealing with China. So Mao Zedong pointed out what's the reason behind it, and how they changed such kind of mentality and operation, which he referred to, this is playing the China card.
具体来说呢，就是我们放弃了打中国牌的那么一个传统的做法。打中国牌是1972年自美国总统尼克松以来，一直是美国对华政策的一个基本的出发点。就是说，什么叫中国牌？中国就是一个牌，牌呢不是一个目的，牌就是为了达到另外一个战略目的的一个手段。中国呢从来不是我们这个美国世界格局的一个重中之重。我们是为了打苏联，我们为了让美国摆脱越战的困境，为了对付北韩的这个核武器伊朗的问题。那么我们都是打中国这个牌，利用中共通过北京去解决我们需要解决的问题。这个呢，在川普政府以来彻底改变了。我们就是 放弃了打中国牌的这种概念，然后把中国就列为我们外交、国防、经济、军事政策的一个重中之重。除了中国之外，没有其他的这个最重要的这个挑战啊。所以这个是一个很大的一个转变。
And Miles, you said with such a big change, it involves many issues. For example, the traditional strategic deployment of the US is very much European-centered, and what should be done to the strategic alliances. So he said they talked to. That's why they talked to our our allies in Europe, and told them, you are now very rich and powerful. You have the economic basis. Why don't you increase your own defense to strengthen the NATO? And we in the United States are responsible for more than 75% of the cost of the NATO. Think about it, it's not fair. So we think you should take on a bigger role. And does that sound familiar, right? So that's what President Trump told the Europeans. And the Trump, the Miles, you said, they also said, now we shifted the strategic center of the US from Europe to the Asia Pacific, to the Indo-Pacific region. So you have to follow our lead. If you cannot do that, then we'll leave. So that's the not so polite message that President Trump gave to the Europeans. So it's not that in the Miles, you said, it's not that the United States have not had such kind of information for all those time. He said we had it, but it's just that no American political leaders has the courage to point at our friends in Europe and tell them what we and they have to do. Therefore, he said under the Trump administration, they had this series of strategic shifts. He said it's very important the strategic changes that has happened. Mao Zedong then went on and explained in terms of Taiwan relations, there has been some very important changes as well.
美台关系几十年以来一直是在美中关系的框架下来进行的，那么我们觉得呢，这个呢，有几个非常重要的发展。第一个，现在的这个台湾的问题啊，已经不仅仅是一个主权归属的问题，它是一个什么问题呢？就是自由和专制的一个问题，台湾在过去几十年来已经发展成为一个非常成熟、非常有这个活力的一个民主。台湾有非常先进的这个技术，台湾有非常这个重要的这个自我意识啊，就是在民主的发展起来以后呢，台湾的国民意识呢，就是更多的人认同台湾的这种自由制度之下的生活方式。那么我们从这个角度来看呢，就是说这个台湾的问题不仅仅是主权的问题，更重要的是一个民主和专制一种对抗的问题。那么我们从这个框架上来讲的话，那么这个就重新定义了这个美台关系的一个很重要的一个基石啊，这是第一点。
So what is the second point?
第二点呢，这个台湾问题呢，在现在中共那么强大的情况下呢，它不仅仅是一个地区性的问题。这个因为我刚才讲了，中共它的周边国家外交非常糟糕，基本上所有人都怕它，或者被他欺负过，那么这个就有一个什么问题，就是一个侵略链的问题，就 chain of aggression。就中共他如果说把台湾拿下来，他绝对不可能就停在这个地方，下一步他可能就是跟日本去争夺这个海上的岛屿啊，再下一步可能跟越南打起来，再下一步可能是印度，再下一步可能就是南中国海，这没完没了。这个呢是有这个先例的。历史上，在这个上个世纪大概100年以前啊，这个欧洲就这样的。德国希特勒德国，他绝对没有停止于1938年3月份吞并奥地利，吞并了之后，他还接着往下面走啊。而这个呢，还有一个很重要的问题，就是说德国吞并奥地利啊，大家可能知道这个他是以什么理由来吞并，大家知道吧？ 奥地利他说是德意志人，他们讲德文，有文化传统。普京也是这样的，他去打乌克兰，他不是说有领土争夺了，他是一个以文明国家的这个角度来说的，所谓的 civilization state 这个文明国家的概念跟那个 sovereign state nation state 是完全不一样的所以说他是觉得这个我们打乌克兰是因为那个乌克兰里面有很多讲俄语的俄国人所以说我们应该受到我们的保护。如果你那个中共也是这样的。他觉得台湾人你们都是这个都是有中国汉人的传统不管是对不对他觉得你们都是讲中文的对吧这就是为什么上次我们在台湾的时候到台湾的3月份的时候都是乌克兰台湾后来庞培友问我这他妈有时候怎么都是同样的问题我说都同样的问题你就给他们同样的回答就行了反正这个东西很重要我们从台湾之后我们到了新加坡这个国家很独特新加坡基本上是搞这个均衡外交的，谁都不得罪。
Okay.
就是说这个
then
好人
Mao
坏
just
人，
said
反正是他为了自己生
Taiwan,
存嘛，他就可
they
以
went to
走非常闲适的
Singapore,
外交
and Singapore is a
走钢丝
very unique country. Singapore basically does a balanced diplomacy. It doesn't try, it doesn't want to offend anyone. That is, no matter good guys or bad guys, Singapore just deal with it for its own survival. And it can do very skillful diplomacy, working on the tightrope. So this time, as the Russian and Ukraine war happened, it acted very differently. So it was the first country in Southeast Asia to jump on the bandwagon and strongly condemn the Russian and impose sanctions. Why is that? Mao, you explained there are 85% of Singaporeans are Chinese. They all know if the logic of Putin's aggression can be justified, then the Chinese Communist Party can use the same reasoning, saying that, for example, European government is bullying the Chinese and the Chinese interests, or maybe Singapore will elect someone of Malay descent next time. So it can have the excuse to invade Singapore. For people, this is a very dangerous thing.
我觉得这个在台湾的问题上呢，这个性质已经变化了就他现在就是说，我们现在认为就是，如果说我们不把这个中共的侵略野心停止在台湾，那么这个中共的侵略量就会继续下去，那么这会对整个地区稳定和世界局势都会造成非常重大的影响所以说这个呢，就是说我们要保卫台湾这要提到一个非常高的日程，这就是为什么。日本的政治领袖、澳大利亚的政治领袖，他们都说，台湾有事就是我们有事是澳大利亚可能还没说的那么直接明白，但日本人有人说了所以说这个呢都是基于同样的考虑，所以保卫台湾它有一种世界意义在里面。
Okay, so he believes protecting Taiwan has a significance for the whole world. Mao also said that people of Taiwan, for a long time, they just feel, the country is just so small. They feel that they are being bullied by big countries. But Mao encouraged people of Taiwan should give up this kind of thinking now. For example, Israel is small too. He said Israel has always been surrounded by neighboring countries and rival countries for decades. But for its own survival, Israel has been connected to the world's righteous forces. So it has been a beacon of democracy, that referring to Taiwan, in facing a communist regime. So he said Taiwan is also very important in this regard. Mao Zedong said, based on this understanding, there has been a very important change in the development of the US-Taiwan relationship. So what exactly is that change?
基于这些认识呢，就是美台关系呢，我们发展美台关系呢，就有一个很重要的变化。这个变化是什么呢？就是我们发展美台关系，基本上跳出了美中关系的框架。我们发展美台关系就是为了发展美台关系，跟中美关系没有什么那个关联当然说一点关联也没有也不对，但是我们有这个。有这种意向，我们实际上你看，在川普政府里面，我们跟台湾发展的一些关系是非常密切的 我们派了很高级的政府官员去访问，然后我们还有这个发展了这个经济上的、贸易上的这些谈判啊，技术上的方面都有。当然军事上呢，可能我不愿意讲得太仔细，但是大家可能都知道，我们在川普时期，对台湾消失的武器，我们的国防上的磋商啊，这个咨询是非常密切的，啊，所以说呢，这个就是这个美台关系的框架。
And Miles continued to share that he said that the American Institute of Taiwan in Taipei is huge. Not only the land is huge, the building inside, on the land is also huge. And he said that that's one of the largest diplomatic offices of the United States in Asia, and that he see. And he said that shows the existing strategic deployment of the United States towards Taiwan. And he said, in the United States, we are very concerned about Taiwan, about the future development of the US-Taiwan relationship, and that also has long-term considerations. Then Mao Zedong pointed out another aspect about Taiwan. So what Taiwan can offer to the United States and to the world. Taiwan has some of the most critical technologies and manufacturing industries that hold the fate of world. For example, TSMC, he said there has been very few countries that can make such a reputation as TSMC. Therefore, he believes Taiwan is not a passive pawn in the world, especially not a passive pawn in the middle of the United States and China relationship. He has so many friends, he said, that who are doing business in Taiwan, and that their entrepreneurship is just amazing. He said people of Taiwan have the spirit of originality, entrepreneurship, and adventure. So comparatively, the Chinese Communist government's aggression is even more absurd.
其实最重要就是中共这种霸凌行为啊，在世界上非常不得人心。他们对台湾越施压，你们台湾就越得人心。所以说现在很多的国家都在考虑这个问题。
And then Mao Zedong also shared a very important point. He said, since the Trump administration, we have also changed some other practice of U.S. dealing with the Chinese Communist Party. What is it? He said, we feel that the dealing with the Chinese Communist Party is one thing, but dealing with the Chinese people is another thing. We talked about this before. It was the first U.S. administration that truly separated the Chinese Communist Party from the Chinese people. He said that we didn't know this is something that many people in the U.S. don't know about, and we thought it was a common sense thing, and it was very obvious. However, when Secretary of State Mike Pompeo had this line in the middle of his speech, Chinese people are different from the Chinese Communist Party, telling people of the world about this very clearly, that the CCP, Chinese people, are not the same thing. Then what's the reaction from the Chinese Communist Party? They were furious. The next day, they had a strong condemnation, and so he said this line was actually the CCP's most fearful thing. And this is that exactly really hurt the CCP. That's why the Chinese Communist Party, they always rules in the name of the people and slaughter its own people. Mao Zedong said something, I can understand just very quickly, but I think you would understand quickly too. If you go to mainland China, you will see all those names. Right? Think about it. The People's Republic of China, the Chinese People's Liberation Army, the Chinese People's Police, the People's Bank of China, the People's Daily Newspaper. Everything are in the name of people. However, Mao Zedong said all of these are ruling the people in the name of the people. So after this was exposed, the CCP is very scared. So later on, in terms of the issue of Uyghurs, the Hong Kong issue, the Trump administration was unrelenting. He said all previous U.S. administrations had avoided such issue and turned a blind eye to it, but the Trump administration did not. And he said, actually, the current administration has inherited some of their practices, at least in terms of the theoretical framework. The Biden administration has inherited them completely. So what does that reflect? Mao Zedong said it reflects another very important change. That is, over the past 5-6 years, we have completely overturned the so-called 1972 framework. What is this 1972 framework? In that year, 1972, President Nixon went to Beijing and made a framework with Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai, the prime minister at that time of the CCP, saying that the US-China relations have a new model from now on. And what's that model? That is, by seeking common ground while reserving differences. Okay, seeking common ground while reserving differences. It means that we're pursuing common interest. We all oppose the Soviet Union. We want to fight together. So what does that mean by reserving the differences? The differences are like the political ideology of human rights. At that time, there was no trade, and so the relationship between China and the United States in 1972, the Shanghai Communique was narrowly defined. The Taiwan issue, of course, could not be discussed at all. So Mao Zedong said that the 1972 framework was very narrow. So over the past few decades, the relationship between China and the US has developed extensively over the past half century. That includes economic, trade, some cultural and environmental aspects, etc. But there are many other aspects that we cannot talk about, especially human rights. Taiwan is definitely not an issue that they can talk about. Even though the world has changed a lot, the US can only talk about what the Chinese Communist Party wants us to talk about. And that has been going on for decades, almost half of a century. And then there came President Trump. He took office. He said, these things are just cliche, the garbage, we have to change. And he said our engagement with China has to be on all fronts. We wanted to talk about trade, but we want to talk about fair trade. We talk to China about everything. We're going to talk to them about the fight against the criminal syndicates across borders, have to talk about the international drug restrictions and the sanctions, and want China to talk to China about the committing the genocide in Xinjiang, the Uyghurs, and they're going to talk about without mercy. So Mao said that this is part of our relationship with between the United States and China, and we need to engage with China on a multilateral basis. We cannot have a very narrow relationship. So after the Hong Kong issue came out, the administration was relentless. The CCP officials were sanctioned from really the very top, the deputy chairman of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress, and to the members of the Politburo, etc. So he said that's unprecedented. So under Trump administration, they put the relationship between China and the United States basically on a more comprehensive, healthier track. Of course, the Chinese Communist Party is not happy with that because they have been accustomed to the very narrow, defined 1972 framework. But the Trump administration was determined to set things back to a situation where we treat the CCP government as we treat all other regimes, but more than that is that we use American values, American laws to measure everything they do, everything they say when they deal with us. We use the international standards to measure and react to the Chinese Communist government. So Mao Zedong said that that's very uncomfortable for the CCP. And so he said it's very important to put China's relationship with the outside world on a more normal track. Otherwise, there will be many problems in the world. There are some of the main ones, and he said, there are many more aspects. For example, the principle of reciprocity. We will do what China does. We cannot say you can let some Chinese companies come to the United States to list on the stock exchange, but our regulatory personnel cannot even look at their books. So that's nonsense. So he said we are gradually strengthening these things. Another point is actually the most important point is that the American society has a new understanding of the nature of the Chinese Communist Party and a new understanding of this ruling party is so important. The Chinese Communist Party is completely different from a democratic country. We can no longer allow ourselves to be deluded and drugged. And he said, we are dealing with China. The Chinese government is not a normal society. So that's the very basic, very main ideas of Professor Mao Zedong's speech at, in Northern California just 2 weeks ago. So it's not directly referring to what's happening right now. The Speaker of the House is visiting US, but I think his speech really revealed a lot of insights behind the scene of this trip. And I know a lot of, with the current administration, and there are a lot of dissatisfaction, right? However, I think one thing that Mao Zedong pointed out is so important. We all have to really realize who is the most important threat to our free world, to the United States. And no matter what's, the differences between the parties, that's something we'll deal with it in the United States. However, we have to really understand what's the common enemy, the most threatening parties there. That's the Chinese Communist Party, because the CCP, what they most wanted, which makes them stronger, is a divided United States, a divided free world. So I don't know how you think of his sharing of such insights. So would love to see your comments under there in the comments. And so let's see some of your comments there. Ruth said your show is so valuable. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you. I'm glad that you like it. You find it helpful, and I appreciate that. So, Intensive Harvest. She's only going there to visit the computer chip company that she's investing in. All right, that's some points there. And NVIDIA. Okay, on the farm, she never is for the good of people, but always for financial improvement of herself. Yeah, I believe, these issues has been exposed, and that's something really important, that we in the United States can continue to have this type of third party, the transparency, because in China, there's no such thing. And all those Chinese Communist Party high officials, you know, the corruption there, it's just unimaginable. And there's no third party, there's no media or the citizen media to expose that. Otherwise, you'll get into trouble. No matter what, in the United States, we still have this mechanism and have this freedom. So we really have to treasure that and work hard to preserve that. I know a lot of such things happening, you know, it's not what we like, but the matter of fact that we are talking about it, the fact that it has been exposed, you know, that means that we have hope, and we really, you know, wanted to improve the current situation. And then let's see anything. Oh, on the Safe Chat, there's no comments there. So I don't know any of our audience there have some comments or thoughts to share. All right, so yeah, and I hope you know, if you have other comments, would love to see that even after the show. Yes, unmanageable. Manageable. All right, yeah, so we'll continue to improve my English. All right, so appreciate that you being with me for the show. And all right, I saw Louis, you said the message about the separation of CCP and Chinese people is spot on. It's very important. Thanks for emphasizing that. All right, you're welcome. Thank you for recognizing that. And learning with Laura, there won't be a world after she visits. Jose, you said bring back Trump during the swamp. Yes, so, well, this is the midterm election, and there will be the presidential election 2 years later. So, indeed, I think, you know, yes, the reality, there are so many things that is not, you know, is not up to what we expected or what we wanted. However, I think one takeaway for myself really is how the Mao Zedong, when I discuss with him, he's very hopeful, very positive. I think this is what we need. He remains very faithful and hopeful about our system here, because he came from the same place that I came from. The Chinese Communist Party ruled China, and he then understands the system here a lot. So even though, you know, we all have different party or different thinking on what's happening right now with the United States, however, the main principle thing is important, that our system, the very existence of the system is so, you know, so much feared by the CCP, and that means something, right? So even though it's not the perfect system, but that's the best one we have right now, and that's what the Chinese Communist Party wanted to be destroyed. So we have to work hard to keep it, right? And really realize what's the most dangerous threat we are facing right now. Okay, Free Speeches said that the administration is saying they don't support her trip, but he goes. I don't understand. Can you elaborate? Okay, so that's my understanding, all right? So in general terms, both parties in our government, in general terms, they have a consensus. the most threat to the United States now is the CCP. Taiwan is very important, as Mao Zedong explained. It's not only an issue of sovereignty, it's the issue of freedom versus dictatorship. So it's a bipartisan consensus. However, in terms of different people, there are still differences. And he also explained how, even though there's a common consensus, but there are different degrees of implementation of such kind of policy and principles, right? So I think we can only speculate. I think there are two possibilities. One is that among the current administration, there are differences in terms of whether Nancy Pelosi should go there or not. But on the other hand, I suspect that that could be a kind of smokescreen, right? Remember, in dealing with the China-Taiwan issue, there's United States has been like under a principle of strategic ambiguity. And according to my discussion with my conversation with Mao Zedong, he's always told me, actually, he doesn't believe there's a strategic ambiguity. The goal, the principle of how United States deal with China and Taiwan is very, very clear, and even more clear now. There's no ambiguity. But in terms of how to do it, he said, we should keep it ambiguity. Otherwise, the enemy will know how we do it. So I think there is possibility that it's just a smoke gun, right? Like a smoke screen that the administration, the White House saying, oh, we don't support it, just to give some nicer gesture to the CCP, try to pacify them, but underneath, in principle, the majority in the administration still supports the trip. That's, I think that's a possibility. So I don't know how you think of my speculation, because the CCP, the government, what they usually does is just show their anger and say something very strong, hoping that the United States will back down. And a lot of them actually back down because of that. However, for people who really understand the nature of CCP, for example, Professor Mao Zedong, Professor Victor Hanson, they all know, just disregard how they say what they say. It's just like a dog who can bark, but it won't bite. All right, so yeah, and maybe they just try to pacify them. Say, okay, see, we say something that we don't support it, but she still went. And I don't really think it's just an individual thing for Nancy Pelosi, right? So indeed, she might have personal agenda, but I think in a more general term, in a larger picture, I don't think it's for her own purpose. So yeah, I hope I answer your question, at least from my perspective. And Matthew, you said free speeches, Congress is a separate branch of government and that they do as they choose. That's true. On the farm, you said Nancy hoping for positive exposure for good photo ops. He may aspire for an even higher office, maybe presidency. Okay. Louis, you said Pelosi bought and sold her NVIDIA the same day for a loss. There's something going on. Waiting on more news of this one. Okay, yeah, let's wait and see. Louis said there were no Republicans that went on that trip. What does that mean? Right. I think they tried to put together a bipartisan delegate. Finally, it did not work out. So I'm not sure what happened during the process. It is not as ideal, as trying to, if there's comparing to having a bipartisan delegation. So I think it probably also reflects the polarization between the two parties. That's unfortunate. Some negotiation may not work out. However, I think if we just came above it, in general, this is such a blow. The trip is such a blow to the CCP. If you know Chinese, if you read, can read what's out there in the Chinese media. Oh, one thing, I'll share with you a couple of things what happened in China, all right, after this trip happened. So first of all the social media shut down in China. Okay, all shut down. Nobody can post anything. However, we all know that the Twitter is still working, and some of those diplomats in China, the officials in China, they still can tweet, right? However, the spokesperson for the diplomacy department, he didn't tweet a word after the trip happened. Okay, after the visit happened. He didn't tweet a word. And on the other hand, one of the spokesperson, she always, speak out, have regular press conferences. And one interesting thing she tweeted is that she tweeted like an reaction, right? A short paragraph. And then after a while, maybe 40 minutes or so, it got deleted. And then she just changed a few words, posted again. And she did that for a few times. Isn't that strange, right? So you know why? That's our analysis, is that really she does not have a lot of things to say about it. However, they need to show to the world, to their own people in China, they are reacting. So she only has this couple of lines to say, so she just posted, deleted, repost, showing that, the government is reacting. Isn't that laughable? All right, and some of the reactions, like replies to this, to her posting, was like, a lot of people just, right? You can imagine the reaction. And some of the people who support the government, they feel so disappointed about what happened, and they feel so disappointed about what the government reacted in China. All right, so you can see what kind of shock or a blow this trip, this visit, is to the Chinese Communist government. So I think this is the most important thing. It doesn't dismiss other concerns that you or me have, right? This is something we need to pursue. We need to pursue the truth. We need to pursue the, to correct things. Louis said, I think all the Rhino Republicans that are going to be held accountable have made deals to walk away, not run again. And Hotro Chick said, I like the gleam in your eye. Thank you. And Louis, you said, I've seen it before, but it was a whole new perspective. Recommend for all here to watch again. Oh, I think you're referring to something you posted before. Okay, Luis, you asked what's the news on China holding people money from the banks. I have to get back to you on that because, yeah, these few days I've been really busy working on other things. And so we'll get back to you. Jose, you said, I do thank Pelosi for standing her ground and not backing up to the threats. All right, yeah, so dealing with the bullying Chinese Communist Party, the best weapon, the best way is not to back down. I think, yes, no matter what, this is the best strategy, and I think we all should remember that. All right, thank you so much for being with me, and just enjoy reading your comments, sharing with you about my thoughts, and sharing with each other. So I hope you enjoy too. All right, so that's it for now today, and have a great night. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.